Welcome to Alcott Stories, where love, passion, heartbreak, and hope come alive through words that touch the soul. Whether you're a new visitor or a cherished long-time supporter, we are beyond grateful to have you here. May this channel be a place where you find stories that move you, moments that bring tears to your eyes, and love that reminds you of the magic in this world. To our old viewers, may your hearts always be filled with warmth and joy. To our new viewers, may you find stories here that feel like home. May your hearts be light, your dreams be bright, and your soul always find the love it seeks. If you believe in the power of love, if you cherish stories that make you feel deeply, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another heart-touching tale. Let's keep dreaming, keep loving, and keep believing together. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. With love and gratitude, the Alcott Stories family. The city of New York pulsed with life under a golden sunset, the towering skyscrapers casting long, imposing shadows across the streets below. Amid the symphony of honking cabs and hurried footsteps, Arav Kingston emerged from his sleek black Rolls-Royce, the very definition of power and perfection. Dressed in a tailored Armani suit, he walked with the confidence of a man who had conquered empires, his sharp jawline set in an expression of quiet dominance. At 32, Arav was one of the youngest and most influential CEOs in the world, the name Kingston Enterprises echoing in every boardroom from Wall Street to Dubai. But for all his success, his life was a machine, calculated, precise, devoid of warmth. As he stepped into a quaint little cafe on the Lower East Side, far from the opulent Michelin-starred restaurants he was accustomed to, he had no idea that fate was about to intervene. Zara Matthews wasn't like the women Arav knew. While socialites and heiresses wrapped themselves in diamonds and designer dresses, Zara wrapped herself in second-hand sweaters and worn-out jeans. While billionaires' daughters held champagne glasses at charity galas, she held a cup of steaming coffee, fingers smudged with ink from her latest manuscript. She was a dreamer, a storyteller, a woman with words in her soul. She had no wealth, no luxury, no status, but she had something far more valuable, a heart full of fire. At 26, she was still chasing a dream that seemed forever out of reach. By day, she worked as a barista, her hands serving overpriced lattes to men in suits who never spared her a second glance. By night, she poured her soul into stories that no publisher seemed to want, and yet she never stopped believing. The bell above the cafe door jingled. Zara, lost in thought, hurried to the counter, balancing 2 cups of scalding hot coffee on a tray. And that was when it happened. She collided, full force, into a solid, unmovable chest. Time slowed, the tray tilted, the coffee spilled, straight onto an expensive Armani suit. A collective gasp filled the cafe, conversations halted, eyes widened, Zara's heart plummeted. "Oh my God," she gasped, horror-stricken as dark liquid spread across the crisp white fabric of Arav's shirt. I am so sorry. I didn't mean—" Her voice trailed off as she finally looked up into his eyes. Stormy gray, sharp, intense. For a single, terrifying second, she was convinced he was about to explode. He looked like the kind of man who had never been inconvenienced a day in his life. A man who could buy and destroy everything in this cafe with a mere flick of his fingers. She braced herself, but Arav did something no one expected. He smiled. A slow, almost amused smile curved his lips, the kind that held intrigue instead of fury. Zara blinked. She was certain she was imagining things. Billionaires didn't smile when coffee was spilled on them, but Arav Kingston did. "Interesting way to introduce yourself," he mused. unbuttoning his suit jacket and shrugging out of it effortlessly. "Usually people just say hello." Zara gaped at him. I didn't. "Relax," he said smoothly, rolling up the sleeves of his now coffee-stained white shirt. "I think I'll survive." It took her a moment to process what was happening. Instead of threatening to sue her, instead of storming out in a rage, he was teasing her. Zara's heart pounded. This man, this billionaire, this titan of industry, was smiling at her. Why? Arav wasn't sure what made him stay. Maybe it was her wide, honey-brown eyes, brimming with embarrassment, but also something fierce, something that dared him to keep looking. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time in years he wasn't being treated like a god or a monster. She didn't cower. She didn't try to impress him. She just was. "Let me at least pay for your dry cleaning," Zara insisted, reaching for her small purse, one that he could tell had seen better days. Arav chuckled. "You think I can't afford another suit?" She hesitated. "Still, it's the right thing to do." Amused, Arav leaned against the counter, studying her. "What's your name?" "Zara," she said cautiously. "Zara Matthews." "Zara Matthews," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "Well, Zara, I don't need a new suit, but I wouldn't mind a conversation." She frowned. "A conversation?" He nodded toward an empty table. "You did just ruin my evening. The least you can do is keep me company for a while." Zara hesitated. The logical part of her brain screamed no. This man was a billionaire, a king in a world she would never belong to. But her heart whispered yes, and for once she listened to it. They sat across from each other, two people from opposite worlds, separated by wealth, power, and status, yet inexplicably drawn together. Arav learned that Zara loved the smell of old books, that she believed in soulmates, but not in destiny, that she still wrote letters by hand instead of sending texts. Zara learned that Arav, despite his wealth, was once just a lonely boy who lost his mother too soon, that he worked for every empire he built, that he feared growing old without truly being loved. Something shifted that night. Arav was a man who had everything, yet he had never felt truly alive until he met her. And Zara had spent her whole life writing love stories, never realizing that one day she'd be living one. A billionaire and a struggling writer, a man who owned skyscrapers and a woman who lived in a tiny apartment above a bookstore, a love story that should have been a passing moment, a fleeting attraction at best. But Arav Kingston didn't believe in logic when it came to Zara Matthews. And for the first time in his carefully structured, ruthless life, he didn't care what the world thought. Arav had dated models, heiresses, and Hollywood stars, women who spoke with practiced grace and moved like royalty. But Zara spoke with passion, with an unapologetic honesty that shattered the illusion of perfection he had built around himself. She didn't flirt to impress, didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. She was real. And that terrified him. Their late-night conversations in the cafe turned into long phone calls that stretched until dawn. "Tell me something no one knows about you," she had whispered one night. He hesitated. No one asked him things like that. People only wanted to know what he could offer them: money, power, opportunity. But Zara wanted to know him. "I hate silence," he admitted. "It reminds me of when my mother died." Zara's breath caught, and for a moment she said nothing. Then, in the quietest voice, she whispered, "I hate silence too. It reminds me of how lonely I was growing up." And just like that, they weren't just Arav Kingston, the billionaire, and Zara Matthews, the cafe girl. They were two lost souls who had finally found someone who understood. It started with small things. Arav, the man who was always too busy for relationships, suddenly found himself cancelling high-profile meetings just to have coffee with Zara. He started showing up at her cafe at closing time, leaning against the counter as he watched her wipe the tables, a small smile playing on his lips. "Are you stalking me, Kingston?" she teased one night. "Possibly," he said, eyes dark with something unreadable. "I think I like watching you work. That's the least billionaire-like thing I've ever heard. Maybe that's because you're making me less of a billionaire and more of a man." Zara's heart stuttered. She had been trying to convince herself that this was nothing, that Arav Kingston was just curious about her, that he would eventually get bored and return to his world. But the way he looked at her, as if she was the only thing that mattered, that wasn't curiosity. That was something far, far more dangerous. The first time he kissed her, it was in the rain. Zara had been laughing, twirling in the middle of an empty street as the downpour drenched her. Arav had watched her, his chest aching in a way he didn't understand. And then, suddenly, he was there, close. "You're going to catch a cold," he murmured. "So," she grinned, eyes dancing, "live a little, Kingston." Something inside him snapped. His hands were in her hair before he could stop himself, his mouth claiming hers in a desperate, soul-deep kiss that tasted like rain, warmth, and everything he had been missing in his life. Zara gasped, fingers curling into his soaked shirt. She had kissed boys before. But this was different. This was a man who wasn't just kissing her. He was claiming her. And God help her, she let him. That night, as they sat in his car, their fingers tangled together, Zara knew. She was falling, and falling for Arav Kingston was nothing short of dangerous. They met in secret. Late-night walks, whispered confessions, stolen touches in dimly lit corners. Arav's world was too dangerous, too cold, too judgmental. If people knew about Zara, they would destroy her, but love doesn't obey logic. It doesn't care about power or wealth. It doesn't wait for the right time. It just happens. And Arav, the man who had spent his life controlling everything, was completely powerless against it. One evening, as they lay tangled on her tiny couch, his fingers tracing the soft curve of her cheek, she whispered, "This isn't supposed to happen." "And yet, here we are," he murmured, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "People will talk," she warned. "Let them. Your world won't accept me." He tipped her chin up, forcing her to look at him. His stormy grey eyes burned with something raw, something terrifyingly real. "Then I'll build you a new world, Zara." Her breath caught. He meant it. And that scared her more than anything. Because what happens when a girl like her falls for a man who can give her the world, but destroy her in the process? They thought they could keep their love hidden. They were wrong. The first crack came when Arav missed an important business gala just to be with her. The media noticed. The whispers started. Who is she? Why is he avoiding Celeste Monroe? Is the great Arav Kingston actually in love? The second crack came when his mother, Eleanor Kingston, found out, and when she did, she unleashed hell. "You think this girl is anything more than a distraction?" she hissed, slamming a magazine on his desk. "She's a nobody, Arav, a nobody. You will end this ridiculous affair before it ruins you." Arav's jaw clenched. He would never end it. Not for her, not for anyone. But Eleanor wasn't done yet. She wasn't just going to remove Zara from Arav's life. She was going to crush her. And Celeste Monroe was going to help her do it. The Kingston name carried power, a legacy built on wealth, influence, and an unbreakable code of prestige. To belong to the Kingston world meant absolute perfection, and for Eleanor Kingston, that perfection was non-negotiable. When she discovered her son, the heir to the Kingston Empire, was in love with a nobody, her fury was absolute. She is beneath you, Arav. She has nothing to offer but struggle and shame. But Arav, for the first time in his life, defied her. I don't care. His voice was cold, final. Zara is not up for discussion. Eleanor had raised a king, not a fool, but standing in front of her, refusing to back down. Her son was no longer under her control. And that was unacceptable. Eleanor Kingston never lost battles, and if her son wouldn't listen, she would find someone who could break Zara Matthews apart, piece by piece. That's where Celeste Monroe came in. Celeste was flawless, a billionaire's daughter, a Harvard-educated lawyer, a woman who had been groomed since birth to be the perfect Kingston wife. She and Arav had history, and Eleanor knew one undeniable truth. History had a way of repeating itself. Zara first met Celeste at a high-profile Kingston event. Arav had insisted on bringing her, holding her hand as they walked through the dazzling ballroom, making it clear to the world that she was his choice. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt it, the judgment, the whispers, the cold, assessing gazes from women draped in diamonds and men with money in their blood. Who is she? A cafe girl? This is who Arav Kingston is choosing? And then, like a storm wrapped in silk, Celeste appeared. She was breathtaking, tall, blonde, wrapped in an emerald dress that hugged her body like it was sculpted for her. She approached with a glass of champagne, a slow, knowing smile curving her lips. "You must be Zara," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "I've heard so much about you." Zara forced a smile. She knew who Celeste was, and more importantly, she knew exactly what Celeste was here to do. Arav's grip tightened around Zara's waist, his body language clear. Celeste was not welcome here. But Celeste thrived in places she wasn't welcome. "Arav, darling," she said smoothly, ignoring Zara completely. "It's been too long. We have so much to catch up on." And then, in front of the entire crowd, she kissed his cheek. It was nothing, just a brief touch. But it was everything. Because the moment Celeste's lips brushed his skin, Zara felt it. Doubt. Arav stiffened. His eyes burned with fury. But Celeste only smiled. She had planted the seed. Now, all she had to do was watch it grow. Arav found Zara on the balcony later that night, staring at the city skyline, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to shield herself from the cold. "She kissed you." It meant nothing. Maybe not to you. Arav sighed, stepping closer. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "She's part of your world, Arav." Zara's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not. You are my world." But doubt had already started its slow, merciless invasion. And Celeste was just getting started. Celeste Monroe was not just beautiful, she was lethal. Born into privilege, raised on power, and trained in the art of manipulation, she had spent her entire life knowing one thing: Arav Kingston would be hers. It wasn't just about love, it was about legacy. The Kingstons and the Monroes had a history that spanned generations. A marriage between them wasn't just a union, it was an empire. And then came Zara Matthews, a nobody, a cafe girl, a woman who had no place in their world. Celeste could have destroyed Zara in a second. A single word to the press, one well-placed rumor, and Zara's life would have been over. But that wasn't enough. No. Celeste wanted her to suffer. So she didn't fight Zara openly. She played the role of a friend. Celeste was brilliant at deception. She sought Zara out, smiling with warmth that masked the daggers beneath her skin. "You and Arav are so beautiful together," she gushed one evening at a charity event. "I've never seen him like this with anyone." Zara, still struggling to fit into Arav's world, felt a strange relief. Maybe Celeste wasn't a threat after all. Maybe she truly wanted them to work. And that's exactly what Celeste wanted her to believe. She wove herself into Zara's life, offering fashion tips, introducing her to the elite, even pretending to defend her against Eleanor Kingston's cruel remarks. "Don't listen to them, Zara," she'd whisper, voice dripping with sympathy. "They don't understand that Arav loves you. They think you'll just disappear." Zara stiffened. "Disappear?" Celeste sighed, giving an apologetic smile. "That's just how they see it. You know, a phase. But you and I, we know better, don't we?" Zara's heart clenched, because deep down in the quietest part of her mind, she had asked herself the same question. What if I'm just a phase for him? The seed was planted. Now, Celeste only had to water it. Celeste didn't stop with Zara. She turned her attention to Eleanor Kingston, feeding her exactly what she needed to hear. "I've tried to support them," Celeste sighed, sipping her wine in Eleanor's lavish penthouse. "But Zara, she's struggling. She doesn't know how to be part of this world." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "She doesn't belong in this world." "No," Celeste agreed, "she doesn't." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Arav won't admit it, but I see it. He's constantly trying to protect her, trying to make things easier for her. But how long before it exhausts him? How long before he starts resenting her?" Eleanor exhaled sharply, fingers tightening around her glass. Celeste let the silence stretch before delivering her final blow. "If you truly love Arav, Eleanor, you'll make sure he doesn't throw his life away." Eleanor said nothing, but the next day, Arav's meetings were flooded with marriage talks, with Celeste. Zara started noticing things. Arav was busier than usual, his attention constantly demanded by the company. The pressure from his mother had increased. The business world suddenly saw Celeste and Arav as the golden pair, whispers of a reunion, a possible engagement, a power move, and worst of all, Arav didn't deny it, not because he believed it, but because he didn't care what the world said. He only cared about Zara. But Zara didn't see it that way. One night, as she sat curled up in her apartment, scrolling through headlines about Arav and Celeste's supposed rekindling romance, her hands shook, and then a text from Celeste arrived. "Celeste, are you okay? I know the media is being cruel right now. Arav cares about you, but this is the world we live in, Zara. You have to be strong." Zara stared at the message. What if I ruin his life? Because the truth was, Arav was fighting battles she didn't even understand, defying his family, his empire, his entire legacy. For her. And suddenly she wondered, was she worth it? The charity gala was a night of glittering gowns and elegant smiles, a symbol of power and grace, a place where the elite of society gathered to flex their wealth and their influence. Celeste Monroe had been invited, of course, the daughter of a billionaire, a perfect match for Arav in every sense. And while Zara had once believed Celeste was nothing more than a threat, this night was about to be something far worse. Celeste was a master of manipulation. She knew Arav's every weakness, every insecurity, and now she had a plan to destroy everything between him and Zara once and for all. It was simple. Celeste had already planted seeds of doubt, whispered poison into Zara's ear about her place in Arav's life. Now all she needed was to turn those whispers into something irrefutable, something that would make Zara walk away. At the gala, Arav was busy, as usual, with the high society crowd. But Celeste knew his every move. She waited until he was alone, a rare moment, hidden away in a dim corner of the venue. Celeste approached him, every step deliberate, every movement designed to draw him in. With a smile that could melt the coldest of hearts, she leaned in. "Arav," she whispered, her voice low and sultry. "You've been avoiding me, darling. It's almost like you're afraid of something." He smiled, but it was a weary one. "Celeste, it's not like that." But Celeste had a different agenda. As the evening progressed, she pulled him closer, seduced him in ways that made his resolve crumble. What she didn't anticipate was the camera flash. A photographer, one hired to cover the gala, snapped a picture just at the wrong moment. And before Arav could pull away, before he could do anything to stop it, the damaging image was captured. In that one instant, everything changed. The next morning, the media erupted like a storm. The picture was everywhere, on every news outlet, every social media feed. Billionaire CEO caught cheating on his brown-skinned lover with high society heiress. The headline cut deep, ripping apart everything Zara had believed. She stared at her phone in disbelief, her hands trembling as the world around her crumbled. The image was undeniable. Arav and Celeste, locked in a passionate embrace at the gala, their lips entwined in a way that was impossible to ignore. Zara's heart sank to her stomach. What was she supposed to think? The media didn't care about the context, the lies, or the manipulation. They only cared about the scandal, about tearing apart the perfect image of a billionaire with his brown-skinned lover. Zara didn't know what to feel anymore. The love she had for Arav suddenly felt like a dream, a fantasy she had built in her mind. Maybe it was all too good to be true. Maybe she had been just a phase. She couldn't stay in the dark any longer. She needed answers. It wasn't long before Zara showed up at Arav's penthouse. She had spent the entire morning fighting her tears, trying to convince herself that this wasn't the truth. But as she stood before him now, the pain in her chest was too much to bear. Arav looked at her in shock, his expression full of regret, but Zara couldn't bring herself to care about his guilt. All she saw was the man she had loved, the man who had made promises to her, who had made her feel chosen, special, loved. And now he stood in front of her with nothing but the weight of a betrayal that crushed her. She didn't give him a chance to speak. "Tell me, Arav," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Was I just your escape? Was I just a fantasy?" Her words cut through the room like a knife, and Arav flinched. But she was too broken to care. The truth was, the more she looked at him, the more she realized that his world was too powerful, too dangerous, and maybe she was never meant to be part of it. He took a step forward, his eyes pleading, but Zara backed away. "Zara, it wasn't like that. I swear, I was set up. Celeste, don't." Her voice cracked. "You don't have to explain. I've seen it with my own eyes." Arav reached out, but she pulled away. The distance between them felt like an ocean now. The betrayal was too much. "I'm not just your fantasy, Arav," she said, her tears streaming down her face. "I'm a person, and I deserve better than to be some dirty secret." She turned on her heels, her heart shattering with every step as she walked out of the door. Arav's voice echoed through the hall as she closed it behind her, but it felt like nothing but empty words. "Zara, please." She didn't stop. She couldn't. Zara didn't know where she was going. Her mind was spinning with images of Arav and Celeste, the lies, the deceit, and the realization that the world she had once dreamt of was never meant for her. She wasn't one of them. She had never been enough. The warmth of Arav's touch, the passion they shared, felt like a distant memory. It felt like it had all been taken from her, ripped away by someone who never even cared. The world had decided that she wasn't worthy of Arav Kingston's love, and Zara believed it. She was just a fantasy. The days after Zara walked out of Arav's penthouse felt like a lifetime. Her world was shattered. The love she had poured into him, into them, seemed like a mockery now. Zara couldn't face the people who once believed in their love. She couldn't bear the stares of pity or the whispers that followed her every step. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of the betrayal, the eyes that saw her as a fool, a victim of his high society world. So she disappeared. No one knew where she went. She cut off all contact with her friends, her family, even her closest confidants. The cafe where she had worked for so long was left empty, and her apartment, once filled with hope and dreams of a future with Arav, stood abandoned. Zara wandered from place to place, numb, trying to outrun the ache that gnawed at her soul. Every step she took, every day she spent without him, was a desperate attempt to bury the pain. But the truth was, she couldn't escape it. There was no place where the ache of betrayal didn't follow. No place where the image of Arav and Celeste, their lips locked in that kiss, didn't haunt her. She had loved him. But now, the world had made her doubt that love. Arav couldn't breathe. The moment Zara walked out of his life, he felt like the ground had been torn from beneath him. The ache in his chest was unbearable, and he could no longer pretend it wasn't there. Zara had disappeared without a trace, cutting off all ties with him. The one person who had ever made him feel something real, something untainted by wealth or expectations, was gone. He tried to reach her, of course. He called, he texted, he begged for answers, but there was nothing, no reply, no explanation. And so Arav sank deeper into self-destruction. The empire he had built, the one that had once made him proud, now felt like a prison. He drowned himself in endless meetings, in phone calls that meant nothing, in deals that filled the hours but left his soul hollow. But it wasn't enough. So he turned to the one thing he knew could numb the pain: alcohol. Each night he would retreat to his penthouse, pouring himself glass after glass, each one erasing him a little more. He never allowed himself to think about Celeste, about the scandal, about how it had all gone wrong. But it didn't matter how many drinks he had, how many distractions he found, nothing could fill the void. Zara was gone, and with her, his soul felt broken. Celeste had watched everything from the sidelines, a smile playing on her lips as she witnessed the devastation her plan had caused. She had won. She had done everything she needed to do, seduced Arav, orchestrated the scandal, planted seeds of doubt in Zara's heart, and now she was the one who held all the cards. She had positioned herself perfectly, taking her place by Arav's side, even after the media frenzy. She stood there smiling in all the photographs, as if nothing had happened. She was the perfect image of a high society heiress. But deep down, Celeste was growing restless. She thought the victory would feel sweeter. She thought she would feel complete. But the truth was, no matter how much she manipulated, no matter how perfectly she played her part, Arav still wasn't hers. Zara was the one he wanted. Celeste could sense it, despite the distance between them. Despite the hours he spent spiraling into a black hole of misery, Arav's mind was always somewhere else, on the woman he had lost. And that made Celeste realize that no matter how many games she played, no matter how much she tried to control, she could never take Zara's place in Arav's heart. Weeks passed, and the world moved on. The headlines faded. The stories about the scandal began to blur into memories. But the silence between Arav and Zara, that silence was deafening. Zara, wherever she was, stayed in the background of his life, a shadow he couldn't shake, a haunting presence in his dreams. His regret consumed him, but without her there was no way to fix it. And Zara, she was just as lost. Every day was a struggle to put one foot in front of the other, to face the world with the same strength she once had. But she was no longer the woman she was before. The betrayal had broken her, had stolen the part of her that had believed in love. And so she hid. She healed in her own quiet way, far from the man who had once been her everything. But deep inside, there was still a flicker of hope, a small part of her that believed maybe, just maybe, things could be right again. But for now, that hope was far away, distant, almost unreachable. The darkness had consumed both of them, and neither of them could see the light. Months had passed since Zara had walked away from the life she thought she knew. The world had moved on, as it always does. But Zara had been living in a haze, a numb existence, constantly battling the emotional wreckage caused by the one man she'd trusted with everything. She had convinced herself that Arav had betrayed her, that his love had only ever been a fleeting illusion. But deep down, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. One evening, as she scrolled through the internet, she stumbled upon a news article that made her stop dead in her tracks. The headline was familiar. Billionaire CEO caught cheating, a scandalous betrayal. But it was a new article, a follow-up report. In the midst of the chaos that had unfolded after the gala scandal, a source close to Arav had come forward, claiming that Celeste Monroe had been responsible for the night's events. The reporter detailed how Celeste had drugged Arav's drink at the gala, effectively rendering him powerless to stop the situation from escalating. Zara's heart skipped a beat. Could it be true? Had she been wrong all along? Her eyes raced over the words, reading them again and again, her disbelief growing with each line. Celeste had set him up. She had staged the entire thing, trapped Arav into a scandal that would tear them apart, and Zara had fallen for it. Zara's chest tightened with a mix of anger, pain, and regret. How had she never suspected this? She'd been so consumed by the picture in the media, by the lies the world fed her, that she hadn't stopped to ask the one important question: why would Arav betray her? There was only one thing left to do. She had to find him. When Zara arrived at Arav's penthouse, it was as if the world had shifted. The once grand, immaculate place that had been filled with light, laughter, and ambition now felt like a cold, hollow shell. The walls seemed to echo with a silence that was unsettling, oppressive. She walked through the door, unsure of what she would find. But nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her. Arav was sitting in a chair by the window, staring out into the night. His once sharp, commanding features were now drawn and weary. His suit, the same one he had worn to the gala months ago, was wrinkled, and his hair was disheveled. He looked like a shadow of the powerful CEO she had once known. He didn't even turn around when she entered. He didn't acknowledge her presence, as though he was lost to the world. But Zara's heart shattered at the sight of him. The man she had once known, the man who had seemed invincible, now seemed broken beyond repair. "Arav," she whispered, her voice trembling as she stepped closer. At the sound of her name, his body stiffened, and then slowly, ever so slowly, he turned to face her. The anguish in his eyes was unmistakable, the kind of raw, desperate pain that comes from months of losing the one person who mattered more than anything. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Zara?" He stood up, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if he could barely believe she was really there. Zara's breath hitched in her chest. She wanted to speak, to say everything she had been holding in for months, but she couldn't find the words. The emotions swirled inside her, rage, hurt, sorrow, but it was the pain in Arav's eyes that stopped her. He stepped toward her, his expression pleading, as if seeing her for the first time in forever had broken something inside of him. And then, before she could stop him, he dropped to his knees, the sight of him on the floor in front of her. The great, powerful CEO was almost too much to bear. She had never seen him so vulnerable, so lost. "Zara!" His voice was raw, full of emotion. He looked up at her, his face crumpling as the tears that had been threatening to fall finally broke free. "I never betrayed you. I swear on my soul, I never did." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had spent months believing the worst about him, believing that he had lied to her, used her, and cast her aside for someone like Celeste. She had allowed her doubts to cloud everything they had shared. But now, as she stood before him witnessing his pain, the truth unraveled before her eyes. It wasn't him. It was never him. The anger, the hurt, the walls that had been built up inside her, all of it came crashing down. She felt the weight of the months of grief, the months of believing she had lost him forever. And all at once, it felt like she had wasted so much time. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached for him, her hands trembling as they touched his face. The truth was in his eyes, in the way his soul seemed to crack open as he gazed up at her with such raw emotion. Zara sank to her knees beside him, pulling him into her arms as everything inside her shattered. She had lost so much time. They had lost so much time. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't know the truth. But he didn't let her finish. Instead, he held her tighter, pressing his face against her shoulder as he breathed in her scent. His body shook with emotion, the years of loneliness and regret pouring out of him in that single moment. "I'll make it right, Zara," he said hoarsely. "I swear I'll make it right. Please, just don't leave me again. I'm nothing without you." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Zara felt the heaviness in her heart start to lift. She had found him again, the man she had loved, the man who had been taken from her by lies and manipulation. They stayed there, tangled in each other's arms, as the pain of the past months slowly melted away. The truth had unraveled, and with it came a hope, a second chance. It was a sunny afternoon when everything changed. Zara had been feeling weak for weeks. The tiredness that had settled deep in her bones was more than just fatigue. She had been trying to push through it, as she always did. She didn't want to burden Arav, didn't want to show him the cracks in her strength. But that day was different. The dizziness came suddenly, more intense than before. Zara reached for the counter to steady herself, but it wasn't enough. Her vision blurred, and the ground beneath her feet felt like it was tilting. She could hear the rush of blood in her ears, the thudding of her heart against her ribs, and then everything went dark. Arav had been in his office, reviewing paperwork, when his phone rang. The number on the screen made his heart skip a beat. It was the hospital. Without a second thought, he ran out of the building, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. He arrived at the hospital to find Zara already being rushed into an examination room. Her face was pale, her body limp, and his heart sank. The sight of her lying motionless in that hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses, was more terrifying than anything he had ever faced in his life. He pushed past the nurses, needing to be at her side. He gripped her hand, his breath shaky. "Zara, baby, please, wake up." His voice broke as he whispered her name. But she didn't respond. Hours passed in agonizing silence as doctors ran tests. Arav couldn't sit still. He paced the sterile, cold hospital corridors, fighting the growing sense of dread that threatened to swallow him whole. Finally, a doctor came to him, the grim expression on his face enough to tell Arav that his worst fears were about to be confirmed. "Mr. Kingston, I'm afraid we have some very serious news." The doctor's words hit Arav like a physical blow. Zara is suffering from late-stage leukemia. The world around Arav seemed to shatter. The walls closed in, his body numb as the doctor's words reverberated in his mind. Leukemia. It was impossible. Zara was the light of his life. She had been through so much already. Her struggles had brought them closer, bonded them in a way that felt unbreakable. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. Arav's knees buckled. The doctor tried to steady him, but he brushed him off, feeling the weight of the universe bearing down on his chest. "Zara," His beautiful Zara, the woman he loved more than life itself. His breath was coming in ragged gasps as he ran back into the room, unable to control the terror clawing at him. He sat by her side, holding her hand, desperate to feel something, anything that told him she would be okay. But as he looked at her fragile face, all he saw was a woman who was fighting a battle he couldn't fight for her. And it broke him. Days turned into weeks, and Arav refused to leave her side. He couldn't. Zara was going through rounds of chemotherapy, and every treatment left her weaker, more fragile. The woman who had once been vibrant and full of life now seemed like a ghost of herself. The strength and fire that had once burned brightly in her eyes were now replaced with the dull, tired emptiness of someone who had been fighting too long. It crushed him. But through it all, Arav was there. Every moment of pain she endured, he was right beside her, holding her hand, whispering words of love and encouragement. "I will love you through it all, Zara." He said it every day, even when he didn't know if she could hear him. "I'll never leave you, not now, not ever." He didn't care about anything else. His business, his wealth, the empire he had built, none of it mattered. Zara mattered. Her heartbeat, her breath, her existence, that was all that mattered to him now. He helped her through the nausea, through the pain, through the sleepless nights when she would cry out in agony. He would sit with her, gently wiping the tears from her face, brushing her hair back from her forehead as she closed her eyes, exhausted by the weight of the disease. "You're so strong, Zara." His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke softly to her. "You're my warrior, and I will fight with you." There were days when she would try to push him away, when the pain would overwhelm her, and she felt like a burden to him. "I'm sorry, Arav," she would whisper, tears flooding her eyes. "I'm not the woman you fell in love with. I'm just a shell of who I was. I'm ruining you." Arav would never let her believe that. He would gently lift her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "You are the woman I fell in love with. You are my everything, and I will love you every single day of my life, even when you can't see it." Zara's eyes would search his, filled with pain, confusion, and love. And in those moments, Arav felt like he was drowning in an ocean of emotions. He could feel her slipping away, but he couldn't let go. Not now. Not when they had just found their way back to each other. There were moments when Zara felt the weight of it all. The exhaustion, the constant pain, the hopelessness that came with every treatment. She had moments when she wanted to give up, when she wondered if Arav would ever be able to truly move on without her, to find happiness again. But then Arav would show up, his face full of love and determination. He would kiss her forehead and whisper, "You're my everything." And in that moment, she would feel his love like a beacon, cutting through the darkness and giving her the strength to fight for another day. Arav's love for Zara became his lifeline. Every day, he faced the reality that he might lose her. But he refused to let the fear of that possibility crush him. He stayed strong for her, even when he was broken inside. In the quiet moments when they were alone, Arav would hold her, his arms wrapped around her like a shield against the world, and Zara would rest her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, and for a moment she would forget that Zara had never been the type to share her struggles openly. She had learned to face the world with a smile, to hide the pain and illness that had started to creep up on her, little by little. But one fateful evening, everything changed. It started with a subtle dizziness, the kind that made her feel disoriented for a few seconds, and then faded away. But then it began to happen more frequently. Nausea, fatigue, a deep ache that refused to leave her. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was nothing more than stress. But the truth was, something was wrong. When the doctors finally gave her the diagnosis, it shattered her world. It wasn't just an illness, it was something that couldn't be cured, a rare disease, one that was rapidly deteriorating her body. She didn't have much time left. Zara's heart dropped into her stomach. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't understand. Why now? Why, after everything they had been through, after all the pain, was her life suddenly slipping through her fingers? When Zara told Arav, he was paralyzed with shock. He couldn't fathom what she was saying. The love of his life, the woman who had returned to him, who had come back from the depths of heartache and betrayal, was dying. Arav was the man who had everything: money, power, success. But now, nothing mattered. Nothing at all compared to the woman he loved. He spent the following days by her side, every waking moment consumed by the thought of losing her. He watched as the disease took its toll, slowly changing her. Her once vibrant energy was fading, and every day it felt like she was slipping further away from him. But in the midst of it all, one thing became clear. He wasn't going to let her go without a fight. Arav wasn't a man who believed in fate or destiny, but in that moment he believed with every fiber of his being that he couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not when they had finally found their way back to each other. He couldn't allow her to pass away without making her feel the depth of his love, without giving her a promise that would last beyond her time here. And so, one evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the hospital room, he took her hand gently in his voice shaking as he spoke the words that had been tormenting him for days. "Marry me, Zara." Zara blinked up at him, confused at first, the reality of her condition clouding her mind. But Arav wasn't done. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Marry me, even if it's for a moment. I want to call you my wife. I want to hold you close and know that I gave you everything I had, even if it's only for a little while." The words cut through her deep and raw, and the tears she had been trying to suppress fell freely. She knew what he was asking. She knew that his heart was breaking just as hers was, but she couldn't deny him. The man who had once loved her with such intensity, the man who had fought against everything, was now fighting time itself. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Arav, I'll marry you." Tears streamed down her face as Arav leaned forward to kiss her forehead, his heart overflowing with a love so profound that it filled every inch of the room. The hospital garden was a far cry from the extravagant weddings that Arav had once imagined. There were no grand halls, no lavish decorations, but in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the love they had for each other. The pure, raw love that had survived betrayal, distance, and time. Arav arranged everything in the span of a few days. He brought in a small team of friends, family, and close colleagues, those who had been with them through their journey. But it wasn't about status or wealth. It was about the people who had seen them through their struggles and understood the depth of what this moment meant. The garden was lit with soft fairy lights, their glow gentle and warm. The air was crisp, and the scent of flowers mixed with the fragrance of tears, both happy and sad. A small altar was set up, surrounded by friends who had witnessed their journey and loved them for it. Zara stood there, wearing a simple white dress, a far cry from the gown she had dreamed of wearing in a grand celebration, but in her eyes, Arav saw everything he needed: her soul, her heart, the woman he would always love, even if their time was fleeting. As the ceremony began, Arav took her hands in his voice filled with emotion as he spoke the vows that only they could understand. "I promise to love you, Zara, for every moment we have left. I will cherish you in sickness, in health, in joy, in pain. You are the love of my life, and I will hold you close in my heart forever." Zara couldn't speak without breaking down, but the love in her eyes conveyed everything she couldn't say. She held his hand tightly as though afraid to let go. As they exchanged rings, the world felt like it had paused. There was no rush, no time limit. There was only them, a man and a woman, united in love against all odds. Tears streamed down Zara's face as she whispered her vows. I promise to love you, Arav. For every moment we have, and even when I'm gone, I will love you still. You have my heart, now and always. The moment they were pronounced husband and wife, Arav pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because to him she was. The small crowd gathered around them, silently sharing in the beauty of the moment, the love that was both bittersweet and powerful. For one moment, time stood still, and though their time together was short, it was everything. As the night unfolded, the celebration was quiet, intimate, filled with love that transcended the walls of the hospital. They danced beneath the stars, just the two of them, wrapped in each other's arms. Zara's condition had worsened, but in that moment, she felt alive. Alive in a way that no illness or limitation could ever touch. She had loved. She had been loved. And that, in the end, was enough. The wedding was not grand, but it was real. It was raw, and it was filled with everything they needed. It was a declaration of love against all odds, a testament to the fact that even in the face of time running out, love could still conquer. As they stood together in the quiet of the night, Arav kissed her forehead, a tear escaping his eye. I love you, Zara. And in her final breath, Zara whispered back, I love you, Arav, always. And though their time together was short, their love would live on. As the days blurred into one another, Zara's health worsened. The once vibrant woman who had brought color and light into Arav's world was now a fragile shell of herself, battling against a relentless disease that drained every ounce of her energy. But in her heart there remained an unwavering fire, a spirit that refused to be extinguished no matter how deep the shadows grew. She had always been a fighter, from the moment she had met Arav, to the depths of her illness. And now, even as her body grew weaker, her love for him burned brighter than ever. Arav could see it in her eyes, the strength, the love, the resilience. She wasn't giving up. Not yet. Not without a fight. But deep down, he knew that no matter how hard they both fought, the inevitable truth hung over them like a dark cloud. They were running out of time. He stayed beside her, holding her hand during every sleepless night, watching as the woman who had once been full of life now struggled with every breath, every movement. And though his heart ached, he never stopped showing her love. He read her favorite novels to her, whispering the words as if they held some kind of magic to keep the pain at bay. He would kiss her forehead, telling her she was the most beautiful woman in the world, even when her skin had become pale and fragile. I love you, Zara, he would say, his voice thick with emotion. I will always love you. And she would look up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, and whisper back, I love you too, Arav. I always have. Those moments, those simple, quiet moments, were the ones that held them together. They didn't need anything else, not wealth, not power, just each other. But the truth was, each day that passed brought them closer to the inevitable. And though neither of them spoke of it out loud, they both knew that time was slipping through their fingers. Despite the crushing reality of her condition, Zara never let herself be defined by her illness. She smiled, even through the pain, even when the treatments became unbearable. She found solace in Arav's unwavering presence, in the warmth of his love, and in the quiet moments they shared. But there were nights when the fear crept in, the fear of leaving him behind. The fear of never seeing his smile again, never feeling his touch. And in those moments she would turn to him, holding him tighter than ever, as if she could keep him there forever. "Don't cry for me, Arav." Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile but full of love. "When it's my time to go, love me, remember me, and live for me." Arav's heart shattered at her words. He had promised himself he wouldn't let her see him cry, but that was before he had to face the possibility of losing her. He stroked her hair softly, brushing away the tear that escaped his eye. "Zara, don't say that. Don't talk about leaving me." His voice trembled as he pressed his lips to her forehead. "I don't know how I'll live without you." Her hands gripped his, and she smiled up at him, her eyes filled with a deep, peaceful love. "You'll live for us both, Arav. You'll carry me with you always. Promise me you will." Arav swallowed hard, his throat tight. He nodded, his lips trembling. "I promise." But deep down, he wasn't sure if he could keep that promise, because the thought of living without her, without the woman who had brought meaning to his existence, was unbearable. Every night, as he held her close, he whispered words of love into her ear, trying to give her the strength to hold on. "I love you, Zara. Always." And though her body grew weaker, her spirit remained unbroken. She held on to those words as if they were the anchor that kept her from drifting away. And in those final moments, when the light in her eyes began to fade, Arav remained steadfast by her side. He kissed her forehead, his hand trembling as he cupped her face one last time. "I love you, Zara." The words were barely a whisper, but they were everything. "I love you too, Arav." Her voice was soft, the words carrying more weight than anything else she could have said. And then, with one last breath, Zara closed her eyes, the pain finally slipping away. Arav held her, not willing to let go, his tears soaking her hair. And in that moment, he knew what she had meant. He would carry her with him, always. Zara was gone. The woman he had loved with every fiber of his being was no longer there to hold, to kiss, to love. But her spirit, her love, her memory, they never left him. For the rest of his life, Arav carried her with him. He would wake up every morning and remember the way she had smiled, the way her eyes sparkled when she was happy. He would close his eyes and feel her hand in his, holding him tight through the darkest moments. He never forgot the promises they had made to each other. Every day, he would visit the place they had first met, the cafe where she had spilled coffee on him, and sit there, drinking his coffee, just as she had. He would read the books she had loved, listen to the music she had cherished, and talk to her as if she was still with him. Zara had taught him to love deeply, to cherish every single moment, and to live without regret. Even in her final moments, she had given him the strength to face life without her. And he promised to honor her memory, to love her, even from afar. "I will live for both of us, Zara. I will love you, always." And so he did. He carried her with him through every triumph, every failure, every quiet moment. Because love, true love, does not die. It lives on, forever. The room was quiet, eerily so. The hum of the machines, the soft shuffle of nurses' footsteps in the hall, all seemed distant to Arav as he sat by Zara's bedside, his hand gently holding hers. Her skin, once warm and full of life, now felt cold beneath his touch. The sterile smell of the hospital lingered in the air, and the weight of the situation crushed him. Zara was slipping away. The doctors had given him the hardest of news. The experimental treatment they had been holding on to as their last hope had failed. Her body had grown too weak. They had done all they could. Arav's heart felt as though it were breaking into 1,000 pieces, every beat louder than the last. He refused to accept this. He stood up, pacing the room in desperation, his mind racing with impossible solutions. What could he do? Who could help? What had he missed? There had to be something, anything that could save her. But no matter how hard he tried to reason with himself, there was one truth that weighed heavy on him. Zara was dying. And yet, through all of the pain and uncertainty, he had refused to leave her side. He couldn't. Every moment spent with her was precious. He knew that now. He whispered into the stillness, trying to hold on to every last bit of hope that was left. "Please, Zara, please don't leave me." He didn't know if she could hear him, but he spoke anyway, his voice trembling. "I can't live without you." His eyes, red-rimmed and desperate, traced every inch of her face, memorizing it, as though trying to capture every piece of her spirit before it was gone. Zara was his everything, and without her, he didn't know who he would be. Hours turned into days. Time dragged on, each second heavier than the last. Arav barely slept, only breaking from his vigil to take a sip of water or answer the occasional call. His focus was solely on her. It had been weeks, but he couldn't give up hope, not yet. Arav stayed beside her bed, holding her hand in his, waiting for a miracle that seemed impossible. But in his heart, he refused to believe that he would have to say goodbye to the woman he had fought so hard for, the woman who had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. It was in that moment, when all seemed lost, that the miracle arrived. The breakthrough came through a phone call, one Arav had never expected. Dr. Ashford, a well-known specialist in experimental treatments, had heard about Zara's case. He had developed a radical new procedure, a treatment so untested and dangerous that it had never been used in humans before. There were risks, so many risks, but Dr. Ashford believed it might work. He was confident that if they moved quickly, Zara might survive. The risks were real, but the alternative, there was no alternative. Arav didn't hesitate. He called the doctor, listened to every word, weighed the possibilities, and then gave his answer without a moment's pause. "Do it. I'll do whatever it takes." He used every resource at his disposal, his wealth, his connections, his power. Nothing mattered except Zara's life. He knew this was the last chance. The treatment was risky, unpredictable, and could cause irreparable damage. But the thought of losing her was unbearable. Arav didn't care if it was untested. He didn't care if it was dangerous. For Zara, he would risk everything. And so the treatment began. Every minute felt like an eternity. Arav stayed by her side, watching as the medical team worked tirelessly, praying for the miracle that he desperately needed. There were moments when it seemed like hope was slipping away. The treatment was grueling, and Zara's frail body fought against the process, but Arav held on to her, refusing to let go. "I'll always stay, Zara." He whispered these words every chance he got, as though they could be the glue that held her to him, that pulled her back from the edge. And then, just when he thought he couldn't take another moment of uncertainty, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden burst of light or heavenly intervention, no signs, no fanfare, just a subtle shift, an almost imperceptible change. Arav was sitting in his usual spot next to her bed, his head resting on the side of her pillow, exhausted but unwilling to leave her for even a second. He had closed his eyes, hoping for some kind of rest, but his mind never fully relaxed. And then he felt it. Her hand, so warm, so real, moved in his, a slight squeeze. His heart jumped. Arav shot up, his eyes darting to Zara's face. Her eyelids fluttered, and for the first time in weeks, something stirred in her. A faint breath, a soft sigh. Zara's eyes opened, slowly, cautiously, and then met his gaze. "Arav!" Her voice was hoarse, fragile, but it was there. She was there. Tears welled up in Arav's eyes as he leaned over her, his hands trembling as he touched her face. "Zara?" His voice cracked. "Zara? Is it really you?" She smiled weakly, and her lips parted just enough to whisper the words that brought his world back to life. "You stayed." Arav couldn't hold it in anymore. His tears streamed freely, falling onto her hand, onto her pillow. He had fought so hard, used every ounce of strength to get to this moment. And now she was here. She was alive. "I will always stay, Zara," he whispered through the sobs, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I'll never leave you. I promise." Her hand weakly gripped his, and she smiled, her eyes full of love and gratitude. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The world could wait. The battle had been won. Zara was alive, and they would face whatever came next, together. The treatment had worked. Against all odds, Zara had survived. It was a miracle, a gift that they both cherished deeply. Her recovery wasn't immediate, and it took months for her to regain her strength, but she was alive. Arav stayed by her side every step of the way, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. There was a fire in his chest, a sense of purpose that had never been stronger. He had fought for Zara, he had never given up, and she had given him the greatest gift of all, the chance to love her once more. They learned to live with the awareness of how precious their time together was. They didn't take a single moment for granted. They laughed more, loved more, and lived more fully, because they knew, more than anyone else, that true love was not just a feeling. It was a choice to never give up, to fight through the darkness, and to always, always stay. And no matter what happened in the future, one thing was certain: they would face it hand in hand, forever. Years had passed, but the echoes of their love still lingered in every breath, every touch, every unspoken word between them. Zara Matthews, once a struggling writer with nothing but a heart full of dreams, was now a celebrated author. Her books weren't just words on pages. They were testaments of love, of pain, of battles fought and won. Her latest novel, A Love Beyond Status, had become a worldwide sensation, touching millions of hearts. Readers sobbed through its pages, clinging to the love story of a billionaire CEO and a brown-skinned beauty who had defied every odd thrown their way. But only a few people in the world knew. The story wasn't fiction. It was hers, theirs. She glanced out the window of her New York penthouse, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The city lights sparkled like diamonds, mirroring the twinkle in her eyes. Life had changed, yet one thing had remained constant: Arav. Behind her, a pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist. The warmth of his embrace melted into her, his breath tickling the side of her neck. "Thinking about our story again." Arav's voice was deep, husky, full of love. Zara smiled, leaning into him. "How can I not? We lived the kind of love story people only dream about." He turned her around, lifting her chin with his fingers so she could see the raw emotion in his eyes. "And we're still living it." Arav Kingston, the billionaire CEO, had built empires, made fortunes, and stood at the top of the corporate world. But none of it mattered compared to the love he had fought for. Once, people had whispered behind their backs. High society had sneered at the idea of a man like him falling for a woman like Zara. The media had fed on their pain. Scandals had threatened to tear them apart, and betrayal had almost cost them everything. But love, their love, had won. They had faced heartbreak, illness, and time itself, yet here they stood, stronger than ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked, tilting her head. "Defying the world for me?" Arav chuckled softly, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Every single thing I've ever done in my life, every deal, every success, every failure, none of it compares to choosing you." Tears welled up in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, of love so deep it left her breathless. She placed her hands on his face, her fingers tracing the strong lines she had memorized over the years. "And I will choose you, Arav." in this lifetime and the next. He kissed her then, not with urgency, not with desperation, but with the kind of love that transcended time, slow, lingering, eternal. Because they had learned something through their journey. Love wasn't about status. Love wasn't about money. Love wasn't about power. It was about fighting, about breaking, about falling and choosing each other again and again. And that, more than anything, was what made their love beyond status, beyond time.